10 years after Brexit finally came into effect, the verdict is finally and officially in, and it's damning. And the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, has now confirmed that Brexit has had and will continue to have a negative impact on Britain's economic growth for the foreseeable future. For a central banker as careful with language as Bailey is, that is an unambiguous admission that the project once sold as liberation by Farage has instead become a drag anchor on the nation's potential, entirely down to Cameron's stupidity and the urging of the far right. Bailey's remarks at the Group of 30 in Washington carry the quiet authority of a decade's evidence. He didn't indulge in polemic or blame, rather he explained with almost clinical precision that by leaving the European Union, Britain made itself less open, and in Adam Smith's words, making an economy less open constrains its growth. The Office for Budget Responsibility supports his view. It estimates that Brexit will leave the UK's long-term productivity around 4% lower than it would have been inside the EU. All of this, I think, has been obvious for years. I think it was obvious before Brexit was even decided upon. This is not an abstract number. Bailey may not want to point fingers and apportion blame. I will. 4%. Less productivity means lower wages, fewer exports, higher prices. It means the tax base shrinks even as welfare demand grows. Bailey noted that the UK's potential growth rate had fallen from 2.5% to 1.5% over the last 15 years, a fall that sounds small but compounds disastrously over time. Had the higher rate persisted, Britain's debt to GDP ratio would be 82% today, not 96%. In other words, Brexit has not merely dented prosperity, it has narrowed the room for policy itself. The promised benefits, deregulation, new trade deals, sovereignty and commerce have largely failed to materialise, partly because of the stupidity of the people put in charge of trying to manage Brexit when it finally emerged. May, Lord Frost. Do I need to mention any others? Exports to the EU have stagnated. Small firms face prohibitive paperwork and customs costs. Food inflation remains higher than in the G7. The government's own economists concede that frictionless trade never returned, despite the 2020 trade agreement that supposedly preserved tariff-free exchange. And crucially, Britain's reputation as a predictable place to invest has faded. Yet Bailey's tone was not entirely despairing. He observed that economies can and do adjust. Over time, businesses rebuild supply chains, explore new markets and innovate. But his point was that such adaptation takes years, perhaps generations, and never fully replaces what was lost. Trade barriers reduce not only movement of goods, but the flow of ideas, people and capital that underpin innovation. The post-Brexit Britain is a smaller pond, and even the most ingenious fish must swim in shallower waters. And here the governor reached for an unexpected optimism: artificial intelligence. Investment in AI and other general-purpose technologies, he argued, could offset some of the productivity loss. In effect, we are betting our economic recovery on a technological leap. That is bold but risky. But it is nevertheless a strategy, isn't it? Bailey warned that an AI-driven market speculation could itself threaten financial stability, a 21st century of the South Sea bubble. Nevertheless, he called it our best hope. The political subtext is unmistakable. Chancellor Rachel Reeves, preparing her first full budget, now faces an unenviable reality: an ageing population, a smaller workforce, and a structural productivity gap linked directly to Brexit. Her choices, higher taxes, spending cuts or borrowing, are all constrained by the same legacy piled on by Farage. And when she blames post-Brexit economic conditions, she is not seeking refuge in cliché, but recognising an economic fact. But recognising an economic fact, if you don't have the brains to go with it, is not very much help, is it? It is striking that Bailey's statement comes as Donald Trump's new tariffs unsettle world markets. He implicitly warned that Britain's experiment with economic isolation is a cautionary tale for others tempted by protectionism. Tariffs, whether called Brexit or America First, are walls built on nostalgia. They satisfy an instinct for control but produce stagnation. So what does this decade teach us? that ideology cannot repeal arithmetic, that belief about sovereignty cannot substitute for scale what was always an illusion. Britain didn't just leave a political union, it left an ecosystem of efficiency and shared prosperity, and rejoining may be politically remote, but rebuilding trust and openness is essential if we are to escape permanent mediocrity. Andrew Bailey's words are not a political attack, they are an historical marker. A central banker has no need to moralise, he deals in numbers, and the numbers are plain. Brexit has made Britain poorer, slower, less competitive. Adjustment may come, will come, yes, but only after a self-inflicted decade of diminished potential. To paraphrase Adam Smith once more, there is a great deal of ruin in a nation, but there is also the capacity to learn. And the question is, as we look to the next decade, whether Britain can and will learn.